Hi, everybody. Thank you for joining us today for this conversation. I am very excited to interview Craig Lemasters about his book, Unstuck, with a great cover, which I love. Um, how to unlock and activate the wisdom of others. I met Craig when he came to Science House, where I am the EVP for business development. We are located in Manhattan. I am here now in the Imagination Room of Science House, where I first met Craig. At the time, he was the CEO of Assurance Solutions, now the CEO of GXG, and his book Unstuck documents some of his methodologies and thinking about getting unstuck. I am thrilled to say I wrote the introduction to this book, and I will write a little bit more about that when I post the link to this event. In the meantime, I would love to talk to Craig about his work in the book. Craig, thank you so much for asking me to interview you today.
Oh, it's my pleasure, Rita, and it's so much fun to see you. And we were just reminiscing that it wasn't that long ago we did our last interview together in New York in person, and how things have changed, right, in a pretty short period of time. But thank you so much for doing this. As Rita mentioned, we go way back, and interestingly enough, really to the foundation of GXG and certainly ultimately the book. So thank you for doing this today, Rita. It's great to see you.
Well, you document a bit in your book the journey that you went through at Assurance Solutions, which, as you mentioned, we do go way back. And,
Yeah.
and when I first met you, you were here with your team from Assurance, and you were navigating, you were stuck yourself. Is that fair to say?
Absolutely. And back then I wasn't using this terminology. It sort of evolved over the years, but that's exactly how I would describe it now. We were stuck. I mean, we had a great business, but we knew that we had to do some, here's a technical term for you, we had to do some new stuff to be relevant in the future. And that's why we were there. We had run into this sort of early on methodology of what we do at GXG today. And what better place to dive deep into that than at the Science House and the work that you and James have been doing. It just kind of fit together. But that's why we were there, because we had to really rethink our future.
How do you feel? A lot of people get stuck for different reasons.
Yeah.
Do you see patterns of why different executives or organizations are stuck, or are they all different?
The tactical things we're stuck on tend to be different. It's a huge array of stuff, but let me back up just a second, because sometimes the word stuck it gets misinterpreted, and some people have actually found it a little offensive when I ask them, which I do, is, are you stuck on anything? And so the way I define stuck is that we're simply not moving fast enough to whatever the destination is. Again, the topics are not that concerning to me. There's a bunch of stuff we get stuck on, but I don't like people to misinterpret it that we're not trying, that we're not working hard, that we're not good people, that we don't care. It's none of those. But here's the commonality: no matter what the topic is, most of our work is usually around, back to my story, when we've got a great core business, but we know we have to do this new stuff. Fancy term would be adjacencies, global expansion, all kinds of stuff, but just new stuff. And that's the commonality when people get stuck. And so we've seen that now, almost no matter what engagement or what topic we've worked on, that's usually where the big challenge comes. And why do they get stuck? Again, if you look at our definition, which we spend a lot of time in the book describing this idea, just like the title says, how do we unlock and activate the wisdom of others? So if I define wisdom as this combination, this intersection of both knowledge and experience,
Mhm.
that's the stuck issue. And hopefully it's intuitive, people. If we move from our core business to the new stuff, our knowledge and experience, and this is what we found in the last 4 years, it doesn't go down incrementally often. It's usually pretty exponential. And that kind of shocks people. We don't want to really believe that, right? But that's the commonality on all of the stuck topics we've worked on.
Well, it's hard because people are, experts in their domain in the way
Right.
things worked for a long time, and you develop almost a tolerance for thinking of yourself as experienced, and then suddenly you're faced with the reality of changes in the world, changes in the business
Yeah,
landscape, changes in your customer base, changes in the way you need to do things, and it is hard to just figure out how to take those first steps. So
absolutely.
what made you write this book?
The book idea came from, at least in my work life, where most of the ideas that I've worked on came from, and that's clients. Hopefully, I and our team here tries to listen diligently to our clients, and it actually came pretty early on. We started really implementing this methodology across some interesting topics, and I had several. But the first client that one of the first we worked on, we got done with the engagement, and it worked. We got to help them get to the destination, which is the goal here. It's very output focused. But he actually said that after. He says, hey, this was really different, and I was really skeptical about this methodology, but it worked so well, you should actually write this down, and why don't you put it in a book? And so that's when the wheels got turning. I mean, I'm not a long-time writer. I didn't grow up dreaming of writing a book. It was really driven by the client. I thought that was actually a pretty cool idea, that if we could document it and be super transparent, because I believe anybody can do what we do, quite candidly. I don't know if that's the best business approach to take to something, but I think it's really important and it helps. So that's where the idea came, and then it sort of evolved over the last couple of years, and here we are finally with a book. It's super hard, as you well know. It's a hard
Well,
thing.
yeah, I did grow up dreaming of writing a
I
book, and I've
know
been
it.
writing mine for 7 years. And I wrote, writing the introduction to yours. You got yours finished before I've written another draft in the pandemic. That's a separate story, but it's hard to write a book, is what I'm getting
Yeah,
at. And I'm
yeah,
amazed at how quickly you did get it done, and you did a really good job summarizing your methodology, I think, so that others can follow it. And one of the things I wanted to talk to you about is leadership.
sure.
Having been the CEO of Assurance Solutions, and I think also being candid in your book about the fact that when you found yourself, to use terminology, unstuck, stuck, actually, you weren't unstuck yet, that feeling that you had, realizing that you had to lead a digital transformation. So
Right.
a lot of our clients at Science House are CIOs or CEOs dealing with a digital transformation, as most companies are. And that means a lot of different things to a lot of different people. So when you find yourself faced with the need to go through a digital transformation, how did you even begin to conceptualize that and understand what you needed to do?
Yeah, no, that's why, exactly why we ended up at your place there and starting to test early on this methodology, because the awareness that we couldn't do this ourselves was the big aha moment to me. And I talk a lot about humility in the book. That's step number one for this to work. Do we have the leadership humility, organizational humility, to just admit? And again, I really focus on the definition here of wisdom. Focus on the definition. Do we lack some of the knowledge and experience to go digitally transform a company? And that was the big aha for me, Rita, when I look around the room. I had an amazing team and the company had done very well, but all of a sudden we're talking, not just talking about this topic, we're investing in companies, we were buying technology, we're spending money, we're trying super hard, but we weren't making much progress.
Mhm.
And so that was the big aha for me. And what I encourage leaders all the time now, particularly related to these big, beefy topics like digital transformation. First of all, do we even know what that means? We
Mhm.
might need some wisdom in the room just to define for me, for my application, my organization's application, what that even means, right? And so that was the big aha for me. And then on the backside of it, once we did that and had the humility, and again, it started literally in that room where you are, to say, wow, what if we brought into the conversation two, three, four, five people that had done the parts of this that we were struggling with, not just written about it, studied it academically, consulted on it, but actually done it. Would that help us go faster? And that was the
Mhm.
beginning of the business model, really.
It's very interesting what you say, because there really is a difference between the theory of doing something and
Yeah,
actually rolling up your sleeves and doing it.
yeah,
And that
absolutely.
attitude of experimentation and that willingness to start trying. And it's interesting what you say about speed too, because I often advise clients, sometimes you have to slow down to speed up,
Yep,
because you need to think and learn. And that's, part of our methodology at Science House is
absolutely.
the right amount of learning before you started taking action, because it's tempting to start doing things before you know exactly what you're going to be doing, and it's
Right.
hard to think things through at the beginning.
Yeah,
You talked
absolutely.
about humility, and I often say that I feel like the opposite of innovation is hubris, and it
Mhm.
doesn't seem like that would be the case. And I think this is where the lack of humanities majors in technology really makes itself shown, because every humanities major knows hubris is always the downfall in every epic story. So, what happens when there's a lack of humility and too much hubris? I mean, how does that manifest? I mean, I think it's related to being stuck in a way. So, if you could talk about that a little bit, that'd be great.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think it is at the heart of being stuck, actually. I probably go a little further. And I might not have done that 3 or 4 years ago, but now after, hundreds and hundreds of these conversations and engagements, I'm probably there. I think it's at the heart of being stuck. And we actually wrote a fun little thing in the book where I think it's fun. We call it the circle of stuck, to try to just give one scenario that I think has resonated with a lot of this, especially a lot of the speaking that I do now, of what stuck looks like. And I think it's a great picture, though, of what happens when we don't have the humility to say, we're never going to break this cycle of not moving fast enough if we just try to do it with our own knowledge and experience. And I also think that that lack of humility is what I mean. We've talked for what, 2 decades now about agile leadership, about this
Mhm.
superhuman leader that's supposed to move at warp speed and do all this cool stuff. Like hundreds of leadership behaviors written about now. So my question always is, well, where are all those leaders? Why don't we have more of these types of leaders? And what I would argue, Rita, is it's driven by the lack of confidence, that confidence and speed go hand in hand. I mean, think about this practically. If we're really confident about a topic or a thing, we can move. I mean, we go at a great speed. Well, when we don't have the confidence, we hit the brakes. And
Mhm.
all I'm trying to suggest is the reason for that is this lack of wisdom, that it's the knowledge and experience that drives the confidence, that drives the speed, right? But think
Mhm.
about that. I mean, you have to have the humility to raise your hand and say, I don't have all the knowledge and experience. And again, it's not that we're bad people. I mean,
Mhm.
I grew up literally running a very successful credit insurance company that became a warranty company. We had tons of knowledge and experience in that. But what did I really know about running a digitally savvy, digitally enabled company? The reality is, again, exponential drop off. My knowledge and experience on that was super low. So I think it's at the root of the stuck issue, actually. It's not periphery, right in the middle.
So, how does a leader know? How do you know when you're stuck? Because is it just a feeling you have that suddenly you're overwhelmed? Is it a feeling you have that you need to defend what you do know? I mean, are there
Yeah.
different sort of flavors of being
There are. I like the way you said that. There are lots of flavors, but a couple tools to diagnosis. One is the destination. You mentioned it earlier. Do you really have clarity of the destination, or do we have a lot of destinations and the destination keeps moving? I think that's a symptom of being stuck, right? Because we don't really know, so we keep evolving the destination.
Well, let's talk about that for a minute, because I
Yeah,
think that's an important one that I see very often. So, how do you know the destination? If you think back to the beginning of the conversation
yeah.
now, think about, I'm overwhelmed by the need to have a digital transformation of some kind, depending on what business I'm in, what industry. Um, how do you know what your destination is? Because I think sometimes it's chicken or egg for leaders to figure
Yep.
that out. So how do they figure that
Well,
out?
yeah, and I have a little bit probably of a somewhat of a contrarian view versus traditional consulting here. So I'll just go ahead and
Mhm.
preface this. I believe there are almost always several pathways. There's several destinations. That are actually very doable. They're very good. They're workable. What I'm looking for is then why haven't you picked one? And I think that's a symptom of stuck. And I mean, I just think that the again back to the confidence to move quickly. Well, why can't I pick one? Well, it's probably because I don't have the knowledge and experience to feel confident to pick one. So I don't usually see in all the work we've done, and it was my own organization. When you look back now, we had several really good pathways for digital transformation. But if the whole room sort of lacks wisdom on that, how are you going to, who's going to pick one? I want you to
Yeah.
pick. And so that's the final way that I would diagnose being stuck, is this circle of stuck. And on the surface, it looks so simple, but every time I've had this conversation, whether in a talk or one on one, I get a lot of nodding heads and a lot of people saying, "Are you watching my company?" And the circle of stuck is really easy. When we go to do a new thing, what's the first thing we do? We have a meeting. And
Mm.
you and I share passions about meetings, right? We have a meeting. It's usually a super long meeting with lots of takeaways, pages and pages of notes that we publish to an enormous group of people. That's what we all do. Everybody kind of agrees with that. But the problem is, that's just the beginning of the circle of stock, because
Mhm.
now we start to copy more and more people on the meeting notes. People are frustrated because they weren't in the meeting. So we have another meeting. And then we repeat that cycle a few times and we get frustrated because we're not really making decisions. So what
Mhm.
do? We bring in think tank people and ideation people and get more notes and a bigger body of work. And I had a CEO tell me recently, they're talking about the CC idea. He goes, I just had an email with 347 carbon copies on it. It's like, how could that possibly be getting unstuck? But it's a symptom of stuck, right?
It is. Meetings are, I mean, as you know, our main business at times
Yes.
is model meetings. And one of the things we can do, well, we have, tools that we use to really analyze how the meetings relate to the
Right.
business. And it is not uncommon at all for us to see meeting invitations that have hundreds of people on them. And to us,
Right.
that is also a symptom of stuck, to use your word. And the way we look at that is, are you spending enough time in the right stage of what you need to be doing in order to move ahead with your business? And
Exactly.
which brings me to my next question, which is, what is the role of customer awareness in this? Because if there's multiple destinations that you could pick, and I agree with you, there almost always are, and multiple ways you can get there, how should a leader or a company as a whole really stay in touch with what their customers' needs are as those evolve?
Oh, absolutely. And I think customers, and I actually started with this when you asked me about why to write the book. Where did it come from? It came from a client,
Yep.
right? And I think so many great organizations miss that. The client should be in the middle. And we actually like clients to be parts of some of the advisory board we do, which is just a way to implement the wisdom-based learning methodology. There's lots of ways you can do it. But we actually would rather have people that are closest to the product, to the thing we care about. Their wisdom, their knowledge and experience on this is gold. But why we exclude them in the conversation? And here's the fun part, Rita. It doesn't have to be that sophisticated. How about a flip chart and some dedicated time to listening and asking questions and making that customer, the client, the middle and not somewhere off the side? We're going to go invent all this stuff
Mhm.
and then see if anybody really likes it. And we
Right.
want to bring that into the conversation. That's some of the wisest people in the room. And I would tell you, of all the mistakes that I've made in this area before I started doing this GXG stuff, that was one of them. We were very negligent about listening to the people that actually wanted and needed our products. And we kind of had it backwards.
Let's talk a bit about current events, COVID particularly.
Yeah.
So, we were just talking about meetings, and meetings are a crisis and have been since long before COVID, right? Because we just have the wrong people in the wrong room talking about the wrong things and
Right.
losing focus. Now with COVID, people are meeting, 13% more, have 13% more meetings and have a 48-ish minute longer workday, right? So I think that the crisis just got amplified, right? So is your perception that because of COVID and because a lot of people are working remotely, there's a danger they might even get more stuck, for
Oh,
example?
absolutely.
And how so?
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree with it. I think the numbers tell the truth there. I think the declining overall mental health of the country is
Mhm.
another great symptom of this. And one of the things that I'm really trying to encourage leaders in our network and our various programs is now is the time for leaders to step up and use their wisdom and other people's wisdom to actually make priorities for people, right?
Mhm.
So we talk a lot about organizational stress right now, and most of it from what we've seen is driven by this pile on. I would say in most places it's not 48 minutes, that's what they're reporting, it's several hours.
Yeah.
So all what a lot of leaders are doing, we're just saying, hey, this is great, they can be on Zoom all day anytime, so we just pile more stuff on. That is the opposite of what we're supposed to do with leaders. And you and I have talked about this before. My definition of leadership is super simple, and I think we get paid for one thing only, and that's to make choices, right?
Mhm.
We do a bunch of other stuff, but we have to make choices. And we better step up right now or in any crisis mode and get better at making choices and priorities. There's nothing that will de stress an organization. And we've seen this on the positive side for leaders to step up and say, hey, stop the insanity. There's three things we care about. Okay. And those are going to
Mhm.
cascade through the organization. And we're not going to work on the other 300 that we've been piling on the last 5 months. That's what's creating the stress, right? It's
Mhm.
not that it's and by the way, having virtual happy hours doesn't fix it, right? It's
Mhm.
just pile on for more stuff. I'm not saying that's bad and it's a nice
Mhm.
community thing to do, but the root of the issue is that leaders have to use the wisdom, theirs and others, to make these priorities. There's I don't think there's no more important time than to step up and do that now.
I agree with you because I think it's an opportunity, an unfortunate circumstance
Absolutely.
catalyzing it, but it's a huge opportunity to return to mission critical prioritization. And one of the things that when you first told me about the concept of Unstuck, one of the reasons I love it, as you know, is because for a long time, about 15 years, I've been developing a concept called the imagination age.
Yep.
And one of the things you and I have talked about that might be of interest to people listening in is this idea that in the industrial era, things were very tangible and heavy, and we could make our brains can make sense of an engine or a loop. In the coming intelligence era, things are much more nebulous, making sense of data, digital transformation, algorithms, machine learning, all these sorts of things. So the imagination age is a way to think about the transition between the industrial era and the intelligence era, right? Using your imagination and going from point A to point B. But I think one of the reasons that's hard when you talk about wisdom, it makes me think this is in the industrial era, because things are tangible, we tend to think they're more real and more important. Whereas the things in the intelligence era seem so complex, we can't make sense of them.
That's right.
So I think a big reason people get stuck is because their brains gravitate to what is familiar and it seems more important. So when you are working as a leader on those priorities, for example, how do you get people to start getting comfortable, getting unstuck from things that feel so real and tangible, and starting to embrace making sense of the complexity of all the systems we're dealing with?
Yeah, well, the first thing I would say, Rita, it's super hard to do that on your own. That's
Mhm.
really why I was stuck as a leader. Again, I didn't have a digital background. That wasn't what I
Yeah.
grew up doing. Not that I'm a bad person, hopefully, just didn't have that as my
Mhm.
background, right? So
Yeah.
what we've seen, the answer to that, what we see this amazing thing happen when we interject this bolus of both knowledge and experience. These are people that have done these things. And I love to use blockchain as an example, right? One of the most complicated, super interesting topics. But you ask the average executive, and we did this actually at a meeting we hosted about a year and a half ago, 12 very, very competent people running companies you would know. And we did a quick session on blockchain to demonstrate our learning methodology. So the question at the beginning was, okay, all your companies are investing in blockchain, right? Yep, absolutely. How many of you really believe you have working knowledge of what this even is? And one of the people actually raised their hand and says, well, I don't even, I want to know, is it a block or is it a chain? Right? I mean, and kind of making fun of it a little bit, but back to your point, that's the old way that we thought. And after an hour and a half, when we had two super wise people that had actually worked on it, specifically in the supply chain area, and in an hour and a half, 10 of the 12 people walked out and said, you know what? I actually have confidence that I can get this, right? That I can expand my mind to actually understand a very complex thing that an hour and a half ago, I didn't think I could really address. And I find that super encouraging that we can do this. But again, all roads lead back to the humility. Those people in the room had to have the humility to say, I don't get this. That's why I'm here. That's why I'm having the dinner with you all.
It's interesting. Blockchain is a great example too, because
Yeah.
I think a lot of times when people learn about blockchain, they realize they have a lot of problems they can solve with something other than
Absolutely.
blockchain that they haven't
It's
solved yet that they need to solve. So
right. Right. We
even
didn't
just
even
learning
really know what it was. Yeah, exactly.
right.
Yeah,
I think that's where
absolutely.
the wisdom comes in, is just understanding too that once
Love to connect with people on LinkedIn. And we share, you'll see on all three of those locations, we share lots of content. I want to be super transparent about the work we do because my passion at this stage, Rita, is really to help leaders embrace this concept. And again, use it themselves, use us to facilitate. It doesn't really matter to me because this works. And I'm really, that's my passion in life. I sat in that chair for running a big company for 11 years, or as I like to describe it, 44 quarters, and it's hard. That's why I'm doing this work. These are hard jobs, and this helps. It's not the end all. It's a big help.
mhm.
But again, I want to thank you before we log off here. I want to thank you for doing this. You and James have been instrumental in this work, and I will tell everybody that's listening to this, if you're struggling with which most are, with meetings and the science around meetings, call these folks, go to the science house. It is game changing research they've done. The other thing I want to do is thank a couple of all this book possible, and would never my own. But first of all, GXGT has been amazing. This work, or this book, is about our work, and they do the heavy lifting. But especially Emma and Megan on our team did most of the heavy lifting to get this done. Our publisher's been amazing, Front Edge Publishing, David, and then our media firm, Morgan Street Media, who's getting to work now, getting the word out, Susan there. They've been amazing. And then the last thing is the 10 endorsers that really stepped up and wrote awesome endorsements for the book. That doesn't happen a lot for a first time